My name's Neil Dale, and I'm really glad you brought me here today. I have been in love with Lowell for many years. I don't live there, but I live right next to it. And I'm very interested in furthering awareness of the earth and our problems with it. And so I've come to Lowell in a variety of ways, most of which have been through an organization called 350. 350 Lowell is a group of people in Lowell who are working locally to create the kind of solutions that we need for climate change, to deal with climate change. You know, I think that there's a common misconception and a kind of misplaced guilt that a lot of people have about being eco-friendly. It does not, in my opinion, begin with buying or doing anything. It may lead to that, and that's a wonderful thing if you have the means, but most people don't have the means to buy solar panels for their house or something like that. Being eco-friendly, in my experience, has been a process of learning and expanding awareness of where I am. Ecology, well, just understanding that I'm part of a system, part of an earth system. And what does that really mean? What is the specifics of it? And then you get into this subject called ecology. And ecology is a really hard subject, particularly for people like me who are trained in a scientific, technical way. We want to think linearly. And you start to think about ecology and you go from one relationship to the next one. And then you know that it's going to connect to another one and then three others. And you have this very unstable feeling of never being able to stop. You can never get enough ecology. Once you take that first step, you can pretty much start anywhere. So the study of ecology for me was very difficult. It took me a long time, for instance, to start looking at my backyard as anything but weeds. Well, it used to be grass, but I gave it back to nature. When I go out in the forest, though, a lot of the time I look at the plants growing there and something in me says it's weeds. And then you start to ask one question, well, what is that one? And suddenly this whole world opens up, but it's slow because it's kind of like this huge ocean of connection and data, which is very hard to begin with. But I think to be eco-friendly is to begin that journey. Because even that first question, like, what am I actually looking at? What does that plant that I've always called a weed that's growing by the side out of the concrete, what does that plant do? Does it belong there? Does it not belong there? And that, I think, begins to change thinking, and it can change your life. And for me, this question of ecology becomes very, very meaningful because the studies I've been doing over the years have to do with the larger systems that the Earth actually has and we're part of, and they're pretty much invisible except when we start to make problems with them. But it's a huge subject, and I believe that it's absolutely necessary for our culture to come to an awareness of the existence of the being of the earth in order for us to understand how the heck we can survive with it. I mean, we're part of it, we were created by it, but we don't have a clue about it. I mean, it's amazing how far we are from even beginning to understand that we're part of a living being. And when you do begin to understand that, then you begin to understand priorities. What's important and what isn't important. The latest song I have, part of what I'm doing is really just communicating. And it's not always by talking. Talking gets to some people, and some people it bothers. But that's why I've learned to play the guitar, and I've been singing songs about it. Because it connects to an emotional level, which in my opinion is probably the way most people, including myself, really need to connect to this issue. So the latest song I've done is called Homegrown National Park. And comes from an idea by a professor named Douglas Tallamy, who's a professor of entomology at the University of Delaware. And he actually studies Lepidoptera, which are butterflies. And here's the first step in ecology. And the first step is there's 12,000 species of butterfly in the United States. 12,000. It means in any area like this one, there's at least 4,000 species of butterflies. Who knew? Many of them were gone in the last few years. That's a whole other subject. Well, it is this subject, but there are thousands and thousands of species of insects that we don't even know are there. So I did this song called Homegrown National Park because I want to spread this idea. And Douglas Tallamby talks a lot, and he gives wonderful lectures. His on YouTube, you can find, his name is Tallamy. And if you look that up on YouTube, you can find his talks, and he's a very good speaker. And I would recommend, if you're interested in this, listening to one of his talks. He has books too, but his talks are very persuasive and wonderful. So I guess that's kind of an example of the way that I want to use music and the way that it means something to me.
There's a desperate situation in America today. Our lovely Mother Nature is about to slip away. We put her on a diet, she's down to skin and bones. We're cutting off the best parts, keeping up with Mr. Jones. And there's really nothing lovely in a lawn. They might as well be concrete, there's just nothing going on. We fill them full of chemicals and mow them all day long. There is really nothing lovely in a lawn. Well, we don't have a lot of land, though we've both been working hard. It might just be a postage stamp compared to other yards. But we'll put that stamp on a letter and we'll write it like a poem and spell it out in native plants, say, Mama, please come home. Oh, come on home, we need you. We won't make it if you're gone. We need your pollination and the rhythm of your song. And if we all would send a letter, things might not get so dark. Make a homegrown national park. Dressed her up in fancy clothes from her nose down to her knees. But I love her when her clothes are off, she can grow just like she please. With black-eyed Susan, goldenrod, opossums and deer, shaded by a big old oak that will stand 500 years. And she'll bring us back our butterflies, she'll bring us back bees. And the birds will sing a chorus every morning in the trees. And if you let her in your garden, you'll find her in your heart, in the homegrown national park. And if you let her in your garden, you'll find her in your heart, in homegrown national park. Let's make a homegrown national park.
Well, I think the first verse has, there's really nothing lovely in a lawn. It might as well be concrete. There's just nothing going on. We fill them full of chemicals and mow them all day long. There's really nothing lovely in a lawn. And that says it, lawns or grasslands are very active, alive ecosystems, but a lawn is not a grassland because every time it gets 2 inches tall, we mow it off. And besides that, they're mostly non-native. Again, this theme of they're not from around here, so they don't support the insects that we want. And besides that, if any insects show up in your lawn, unfortunately, people are apt to go to the hardware store and buy some chemicals to kill them, not really realizing how important the insects are. A lot of the native plant people, when they see insects eating their plants, they're happy because native insects usually don't eat very much. They put a few holes in it, but that means that the ecosystem is alive. So I think that's one line that's significant. I think the next one would have to do with come on home to Mother Nature, please come home. Come on home, we need you. We won't make it if you're gone. We need your pollination and the rhythm of your song. And the rhythm of your song is actually significant because what's happening now with global warming is that it's disrupting the rhythms of nature. And that's one of the most important ways that species are going extinct or are being threatened, is by when you change when the season starts, or if you have a few days of summer and then a few days of winter, and then like just this afternoon, I watched the temperature outside go from 70 plus degrees down to 57. It's just in the course of 10 minutes. That is not normal. We've forgotten this. 20 years ago, that didn't happen. 30 years ago, that didn't happen. I know it because I'm 70 years old. I've been around and I've seen it. But a lot of people who have grown up since then don't know that this is not normal. And insects and birds, they feel it. So if it gets too warm in the spring too quickly, insects will hatch out before the birds that migrate in and depend on them show up. And so they'll show up and the caterpillars aren't there for the birds to feed their babies. I forgot a step. Caterpillars are totally necessary for almost all the birds to feed and raise their babies on. They're necessary. Birds can't feed their young chicks. They can't feed them insects or seeds. They have to feed them caterpillars. So if they show up in March and the insects have come and gone already because it got too warm, their numbers are reduced. They don't necessarily go extinct, but there is just fewer and fewer of them. So we need those rhythms. They're very carefully worked out rhythms that nature has. All these different cycles work together if the landscape isn't disrupted. And so we really need her rhythm. And it's almost, well, it's sad. If you let her in your garden, you'll find her in your heart. And that is another invitation to the kind of change that I'm talking about becoming eco-friendly. Because if you start to make these changes, and you don't have to own a house, you can be working in the public land, because the public land is completely filled with invasive plants now. Not completely, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of things to be done anywhere. And if you start to work with that kind of thing, it starts to change yourself. So I guess those are three of the most important lines in the song for me. Well, I was just talking to my brother. I sent this song to him, and he's down in North Carolina, and he said, we might start doing something like this. And I said, well, Doug's telling me, he says, start small. Just get some plants and start putting them in. So I really would recommend that kind of approach. Personally, it's interesting. I come to this by studying it. Oddly enough, I've been writing about the Earth. I'm just before I started talking to you guys, I was doing a final edit on a 450-page book that I'm writing called "Who is the Earth?" And I've been working on this book for 10 years now, and hopefully it'll be out really soon. Actually, it's got lots of illustrations, and it's an exploration of Earth systems. And I've been fascinated by them because I studied geology when I was in college. My family is geological, and my grandfather was a geologist. My great-grandfather was a geologist, and I studied it myself, but dropped out of it to become an artist when I left school. And the reason was it didn't seem to have a relationship to, I don't know how to describe it, an emotional relationship to me. I loved it. I mean, I'm interested in it, but I've come back to it in the last 10 or 20 years because I realized that biology is actually geology and the rivers. Geology, which I always thought of, even making mountains, is actually biological. Mountains are eaten by lichens slowly. They're digested. They don't wear, they don't erode, they are digested. And so this whole subject has become much more interesting to me in a very big way. And then eventually I look out in my own yard and I've always hated lawns. I never really quite knew why, but now I do. There's nothing going on. You know, they're just boring. And so I actually just said, I want to have a conversation with nature. I'm really interested in this being and how to talk to her. Great examples. Every time I plant something that I want to see, like an elderberry bush, I want elderberries, they're native. And I planted 2 of them and the deer ate 1 of them. And then the next year I looked around and I realized that 20 feet away was a 12-foot tall elderberry bush that I hadn't noticed. Now, how do you think I didn't notice it? Well, I just didn't look. I wanted blueberries. I did the same thing, and I found out I have 2 10-foot wild high bush blueberries already growing in my yard. Grapes, I wanted grapes. They're growing up out of the ground all over my yard. So I've been finding out that a conversation with nature is a really interesting thing. To say this is, an individual can't do much by themselves, and I know that. And I have to be. Anybody who wants to be effective these days, any day actually, has to be part of a larger group that is doing something that you agree with. And if you want to make a difference to the climate, there's only so much you can do by yourself. You know, you can get an electric car and stuff like that. But if you really want to have an effect, you learn how to talk to legislators and you learn how to work with groups to change laws. That's how you can really be effective as an individual. And so I joined 350 because that's what 350 is about. The number 350 represents the amount in parts per million of carbon dioxide that ought to be in the atmosphere. We're at 420 now and rising. So their specific focus is actually changing the way we use fossil fuels and stopping using fossil fuels. That's really pretty much what 350 is about. But it's a very important struggle, and it's a very specific one. Well, I like being active. A couple of days ago, I was out. I walked across every bridge in Lowell that leads to Pawtucketville or Centerville. There's 4 of them, and I put up posters for a ballot question that we have gotten out of the ballot in Tom Golden's district. Now, a little backstory here. The Mass legislature is a peculiar, very black box that only has a few people in it. And it turns out that there's a few people on Beacon Hill who actually control the dialogue and the legislation that happens. And one of them is named Tom Golden, and he's head of the Energy Committee, which means that if you're worried about climate change, he's the person to talk to. And his district is Pawtucketville and Centerville and North Chelmsford. So we have decided, we were out with clipboards in hands at the market basket a couple months ago, getting signatures necessary to get a ballot question on the November ballot, asking for 100% renewable energy by 2040. Because we know that if Tom Golden hears from his constituents, that's the one way that we have to help him to see the light. So there's a lot of things that we really want him to hear. So we went out and we got all the signatures, and we got a petition on the ballot, a question on the ballot. And so I was out yesterday putting up signs at the beginning and the end of all the bridges. So I got to walk across the river in 4 different places, which was rather interesting because I got to see the geology underneath it and the way it changes. It's kind of cool. So I like that. I had to climb up on the bridge to put them on and stuff. When I first joined, somebody wanted Marissa Shea. Gosh, she's great. She kind of burned out. I don't know. I haven't seen her in a long time, but she's a wonderful, very active person. And she wanted to put up over the highway, 2 bridges over 495. She wanted to have a 2-part sign, and we agreed that it should say, "Talk about climate change." Because this is like 5 years ago when it was still, people hardly even thought about it much. And so I got bed sheets at the Goodwill, and my wife sewed them together for me. And then we had a big painting party, and we all got together, and we painted these huge banners that are 20 feet long by about 8 or 10 feet wide, and we hung them up on the bridges and then talked to the cops when they came. And we did this quite a number of times, and we actually stopped traffic. I don't like to say that, but people really looked at them. And it was an effective way of outreach, of talking to people, saying this matters. So I really enjoyed that. I'm an artist, and I can do that kind of thing. I also, well, enough said. That's the kind of project that I like taking on. Wow, it's a great vision. I want to share it. I think we inevitably respond to the political conditions of the moment. And for the last 4 years, there really hasn't been much point. That's a brick wall that I don't want to spend my time banging my head against. The federal level really has been pretty much impossible for the last 4 years. It really wasn't that great under President Obama either, but it certainly hasn't been anything in the last 4 years. So that's when we decided we had to be local. Before that, well, also, there's different levels of organization. I mean, I've become much more aware of government than I used to be. There's the federal level, there's the state level, there's the local level, and each one of them has its own legislators and own elected representatives and its own projects. And so you have to assess all the time, which one can we make and which one can we change? So in terms of the state level, there's a Massachusetts 350. They even have a couple of paid staff. So they coordinate our efforts on the state level, and they'll suggest something to us. They suggested this ballot initiative to us, and we took it on as a local node. So they're coordinating that. I think they do a pretty good job. I think we don't talk specifically. Well, no, excuse me. There's a statewide steering team, and we're part of that. So we talk to the other nodes that way in the context of the larger organization. And there's personal networks too, where you know somebody, and if you need, well, right now we're looking for help. Actually, we have all these door hangers, because we got this question on the ballot in Tom Golden's district, but hardly anybody knows it's there. It wasn't part of the state mailer, so we're afraid that a lot of people are going to go. Most voters are going to get their ballot and not even see this question. So we're very scared that it might not pass. So we're putting out door hangers all over his district, but there's like probably 30,000 households to get, and we couldn't possibly do that as a node. So we're looking for help. So we're asking other nodes if they can come down and help us put out door hangers and stuff like that. I mean, if anybody who's listening wants to help, we're more than welcome. Actually, in general, I think I should say this. Anybody who is interested in kind of what we do, we have a Facebook page, which is basically 350 Mass of Greater Lowell. And you can communicate with us that way. Also, I think info@350MA of Greater Lowell, I think, is the way to talk to us. Actually, I think if anybody actually even asked your program, I think they could direct them to me or to John, somebody who's in our node. Maybe afterwards we could put up a thing that has that information on it, because it's hard to remember an email address. But we're always interested in working with other people, other groups. I mean, a lot of our work has to do with reaching out to and coordinating with other groups in this area, not necessarily related to climate change. I mean, not necessarily they're dedicated to that, but this question of social justice comes up, and the people most impacted by climate change across the world are the people who can't afford to move and can't afford to stop a chemical plant in their neighborhood. So social justice is first and foremost in this area. And again, we're trying, with some success. Depends on, really, a lot of it has to do with Lowell doesn't feel to itself, to its residents, like it has much to do with climate change yet. It's not like Miami where the water is rising. So we're always looking for ways to connect to different communities, the Cambodian community, the Spanish community, the African community. But like I said, we're very happy to have other people help us or connect with connect to us through their organization or their church. Right now we're doing an outreach program to different houses of worship, churches, mosques, synagogues, and trying to work with them. Well, I think the other effort that we're making has to do with outreach. And like I said, we're trying to talk to every single house of worship in Lowell. Whether they answer back or not is another matter. But we're asking them where they're at with this awareness, and offering. We have a website that was generated by one of the people in our group of different faith-based resources, because there and from a Muslim take on climate change, a Jewish take on it, a Baptist take on it. There's a lot of different, and so we're reaching out to these different groups to see if there's a way that we can make liaisons, and maybe wherever they are and they're growing awareness of this, we'd like to be able to help them. I've spoken at the UCC church, and now they have their own green group, which was started by others. Well, kind of a lot of us got together, and they're now working on this, and we're looking for others. So I think that's probably the other thing. We're trying to pass out this website and find other groups that are other faith-based groups that might be interested in working on this. I've spoken to chambers of commerce, and others in our group are very good speakers, and they've spoken to community groups and stuff all over Lowell. We're really just trying to find ways to talk to people about this. And the effects that it's going to have and is already having, but we really kind of don't want to see them. I think that's mostly what it is. It's going to have a huge effect on us if we don't do anything about it. And so we're trying to talk about that and talk about solutions at the same time, because it's depressing, and that's a lot of the reason people don't want to talk about it. But it doesn't have to be. If you approach it from the point of view of solutions, it's not at all depressing. I mean, I love learning about the earth. To me, it's the most exciting subject I've come across in 20, 30 years.